Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. Rivers in national parks are not being properly protected from agricultural pollution or sewage discharges, according to a new report.
The fact that the majority of rivers in our national parks, internationally protected areas, are failing just signals that we need to do a lot more.
Campaigners are now calling for government water reforms to consider the needs of national parks. We'll have more on that in just a moment. First, though, today, fishing is still recovering from the impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine, according to a report on the economics of the UK fleet produced by the industry body Seafish. The analysis looked at figures from 2023 to 24 and found that whilst operating costs for fishers have risen, profits have also gone up. But there are just over 5,000 vessels registered for fishing, but the figures show only half are actively working, a quarter are considered low activity, and the other quarter are inactive. I asked Jennifer Robson, Head of Economics, Insight and Advice at Seafish, if the sector is surviving or thriving.
It definitely has been in a period of survival rather than thriving. COVID certainly played its part in disrupting global food supply chains, so there's been knock-on effects of that. There's also been a number of geopolitical issues, rising fuel prices as a result of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which disrupted the global supply chains of energy, and that's had a knock-on effect on our processing industry.
From this report, people might be surprised that the majority of vessels are under 10 metres long. Less than 100 UK fishing vessels are bigger than 24 metres. So how does that play into the economics of the fleet as a whole?
A lot of our fleet are small scale, under 10, with many of them even being under 8 metres. And that means that they tend to utilise fishing methods such as pots, lines, and they have a huge impact on their local communities because they're very much a part of those local communities.
Your report mentions the challenges vying for space with wind farms, restrictions for fishing in marine protected areas. How significant is the pressure for fishing grounds at sea? Is that actually making a difference to the economics of the fishing fleet?
Yes, absolutely. This is probably the biggest issue that the fishery is currently facing, and that's definitely coming up. It's come up in the report that we've just produced. It came up in the year before's report, and I have researchers collecting data for 2025 and they're telling us the same stories. So the spatial squeeze issue, whether that be wind farms, whether that be cabling, whether that be marine protected areas, is certainly the biggest issue that's been discussed by fishers when we go out and speak to them firsthand.
How much impact is that having?
A huge impact because they are individual fishers, often fishing in small vessels. There's not the same national representation that there would be if you were the cabling industry or you were the wind farm agency. And that's the biggest challenge, is how they organise themselves, because they are small voices and there's a different fishery in different parts of the UK. So the small voices, even collectively from one port, is still relatively insignificant in size in comparison to a multinational wind farm producer. It's not the discussion about either or, it's the discussion about how do we get that right balance.
Jennifer Robson from Seafish. Now, all week we're talking about rural services, things like health and transport. Well, there's just over a week left to respond to a public consultation on the future of the post office network. The government's inviting people to tell them what services post offices should provide and how the network can be modernised. It comes against a backdrop of post office closures, with rural areas, according to the Countryside Alliance, being particularly affected. Fiona Clampin has been to South Devon to meet Bradley Gerard, Secretary of the Village Shop Association in Atherton Gifford, which lost its post office earlier this year.
This is our village shop. It's in a wooden building here, quite a small one. It was opened in 2009 after a community effort to fund the construction of it. A shop and post office has been here since then. But prior to that, the village has had a very long history of post office services. I'm reliably told our first postal service was back in 1850, and there's even a property in the village called the old post office, and there's a photograph I've been sent from 1901 whereby a post office service was there.
As we were coming up the path, we can hear the beeping of an alarm. We can't go in, but not much happening in there.
Very sadly, our previous tenant died early this year, and the committee's been working to get our new tenant into the shop. So as you say, we can't get in there right now because our new tenant is working on getting it ready to reopen again. Unfortunately, when the shop closed, obviously the post office closed with it. At the time, the post office released a public letter, and there was a key sentence in there for us that said at this time, the post office service could not continue, which made sense. The shop wasn't open, so of course you couldn't run a post office. We were obviously hopeful that the "at this time" phrase meant that in the future time they could still come back.
Yeah.
But unfortunately it's becoming less optimistic, I would say, that we will get a post office service returning here, which will be a real shame for the village.
How well used was this post office?
I think it was well used for the location. I think if you are at the post office and you look at the figures, you probably think it's not very well used, but post offices provide a vital community asset.
There's quite a few elderly people in the village, and they were using it. It was their lifeline to get stamps, to do deliveries.
We used it most days, or certainly most weeks.
And what do you think the impact is on people who perhaps can't get around so easily?
Well, I think it's devastating because they're going to have to get on a bus if they haven't got a car, or they're going to drive 5-6 miles away. And no, it's not good, but I understand this is happening all over. The post office up the road is closed, and we're on a downward spiral here, unfortunately.
With other post offices closing in South Devon and elsewhere, the local MP, Lib Dem Caroline Voden, has raised the issue in Parliament.
The services the post office provide are really key, particularly banking services and things like applying for driving licences and, people who want to do things, face to face with someone on a post office counter. It's really crucial that we keep the post office open.
There is going to come a point where everything will be done online, and so perhaps that explains this decision to close them.
I think it's a really dangerous road to go down to say that everything will be done online. I think there will always be people who can't do things online. For example, you will always have older people who don't feel comfortable doing things online, people who don't trust online banking. The other thing is that in an area like South Devon, we have really poor broadband connectivity. So for some people, it is actually really difficult to get online. And that may sound ridiculous, but people speak to me every week about the problems they're having with broadband connections.
In its Green Paper, the government says that in the wake of the Horizon IT scandal, it's time to have an honest conversation about the challenges facing the post office and ensure it's fit for the future. But for Sarah Lee, Director of Policy at the Countryside Alliance, the proposals outlined in the paper could go further.
We welcome some of the ambition, but it's not ambitious enough in delivering and supporting rural communities, and it's not going to do enough to support and maintain post offices in those hard to reach communities. So that's a real kind of concern of ours. There's something called the access criteria. I think it was introduced about 15-20 years ago, which has ensured we have a really good network of rural post offices. And within the new Green Paper, that is being looked at. So I have great concern that that could be under threat, which then will lead to a further decline in rural branches. We're seeing decline in public transport, we're seeing banks close, so the increasing reliance that people are having on that post office. And then if we see that those close within 3 miles, we're going to put increasing pressure on people to travel further and further to do everyday tasks.
Sarah Lee from the Countryside Alliance. The Department for Business and Trade told us in a statement that its preference is to keep the overall size and shape of the post office network the same, but that it's right to consider a range of options to secure its long-term future. A new report claims rivers in England and Wales's national parks aren't being protected adequately from agricultural pollution and sewage discharges. Rivers at Risk has been published by the Campaign for National Parks and the Rivers Trust. Their research assessed waterways in every national park in England and Wales. It found that in some areas, sewage infrastructure was unable to cope with a seasonal influx of holiday visitors. Almost 60% of rivers and lakes in national parks are failing to reach the legal standard for good ecological status. But I put it to Dr. Rose O'Neill, the Chief Executive of Campaign for National Parks, that rivers in national parks are 3 times more likely to achieve that good status than other rivers. So they're doing better than some elsewhere.
Our rivers in our national parks are some of the most biodiverse and most internationally renowned. People come from all over the world to visit them, and we'd expect the water there in national parks to be the highest standard. And so why it's good news that they are doing a bit better than the rest of the country, the fact that the majority of rivers in our national parks, internationally protected areas, are failing, just signals that we need to do a lot more.
You've put a lot of emphasis in this report on sewage discharges, although the report says that agricultural runoff is actually responsible for slightly more national parks rivers failing to meet good status. So why are you concentrating on sewage discharges?
So we looked at 2 different data sets held by the Environment Agency. The first was the reasons for failure data set, and that identified that just under half of failing rivers in national parks are affected by problems arising from agriculture and rural land management. But just under that, 41% were affected by water industry. And actually, separately to that, we looked at sewer overflows. And we know that sometimes the impact of those sewer overflows can be under-identified, and that when we looked at it, it was really shocking actually that sewer overflows were spilling twice the rate inside national parks compared to outside. So I think what the clear message really is that, rivers are complicated and we need action on multiple fronts in order to get these rivers to good health.
Are we talking there about these combined storm and sewage outlets? How did you arrive at those frequency figures for the overflows?
So we looked at the number of hours each sewer overflow was spilling. And in national parks, we found on average that for a single sewer overflow, it was spilling for 549 hours a year, which was compared to just 266 hours for a sewer overflow outside national parks.
We did ask Water UK, which represents the water companies, to respond. They didn't have anyone to talk to us, but they did send us a statement, and they said water companies are investing £12 billion to almost halve spills from storm overflows by 2030 with high priority sites, and that includes sites of special scientific interest, chalk streams, marine protected areas, so they're talking about the sea as well.
What we were shocked by when we asked all the water companies what they were doing is that they weren't including national parks in those high priority sites. And so what we're worried about is that they might be doing a lot of that investment, but it's not necessarily going to reach the parts that need it most. Historically, regulation has meant that there has been lack of investment, particularly in rural areas. We know that, for example, the fact that millions of tourists are visiting these places, and that isn't taken account of in water company planning.
What do you want the government to do about it?
A greater role for National Park Authority so they can do even more. I mean, we've seen some great examples of where they're working with, farmers and land managers to deliver river restoration, but they just don't have enough power, enough support to go that extra mile and tackle the pollution. More broadly, the government is poised to make the biggest change to water reform and water legislation in decades. The point of this report today is really to say, make sure that we're thinking about our most important sites, our national parks, when we're designing that set of regulation, to make sure it works for, these really special rural areas as well as country at large.
Dr. Rose O'Neill from the Campaign for National Parks. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Sarah Swadling. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.